I'm really excited to sit with Tom Pride today, and we are going to be talking about pornography and abuse because I really think it's a topic that we need to talk about. So if you have children in the car or any other thing that might make that difficult, I encourage you to listen at a time where you can do that privately. So let's go.
Welcome to the Sifted Wheat Podcast with Leslie Lamb, a counselor by profession, a minister of truth, and a lover of people. This is a safe place where she sets a path for others to learn how to move through hard seasons with confidence and grace, encouraging your faith, empowering your choices, and challenging your perceptions through the Word, the wisdom from years of counseling others, and her own experience of being sifted. Here's Leslie.
Okay, Tom, I'm so excited to be here with you.
Thank you.
And I know that I've seen you speak several times, and I just personally honor you so much. I mean, you just have so much wisdom. And it's not just wisdom, it is godly wisdom, which is truly the only wisdom there is. And I can tell that you feel what you teach, that you're passionate about it. And I'm a very passionate person. And so I wanted to have you on the podcast so that we could talk about those things.
Thank you for having me.
So we've been talking a lot about healthy sexuality the last few weeks. And we've even had some testimonies of some people that have shared just their sexual trauma and how it has affected them. And one of the things that she said really prompted me to reach out to Banner and to see if you and I could have a conversation. And that was that she was sharing that as she has grown up and as she's become an adult, she realized that her attractions to men were looking for men who were aggressive, looking for men who were controlling and domineering. And when she said that, I just thought about the conference that I went to where you were talking about recognizing abuse in systems. And that was one of the things that you said was the prevalence of abuse and pornography being correlated. So I was wondering if you could just kind of share with me where you see that and how we can be more aware of that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to kind of make a few distinctions.
Sure.
So, for instance, I don't think I've ever had an abuse case that didn't involve porn. That doesn't reverse that the presence of porn is by itself a predictor of abuse.
Right.
However, there are a number of problems with that. So let me clarify.
Sure.
I don't mean that the presence of porn is not an action that is abusive to the relationship. But I do believe that. But it doesn't necessarily create the imbalance of power that an abusive relationship is going to hold. So it doesn't require that to be true. That doesn't mean the behavior is good, and any sin at its fundamental root, anytime we sin, it is by its nature abusive to someone, because it's either love God or love your neighbor. And so everything else is sin. And if it's not loving, then it is abuse in a behavioral, like, I did a bad thing kind of sense. But what we're usually talking about when we're talking about an abusive relationship is more of a systematic way of relating that creates a power imbalance that is destructive to one party or the other. But any relationship that takes the ethos and patterns of porn and makes them real is going to be an abusive relationship. So we're now acting it out in our relationship. That is by itself going to be abusive.
Yeah.
Because porn is fundamentally abusive.
And we see that. And, you know, I would say I have a few male listeners, but a majority of my listeners are probably female. And I even noticed recently there was a book that was circulating and everybody was like, you should read this. It's such a good book. Or this author is so good. And I'm a reader. And so I pick it up and I'm like, sure, let me just look at it. And within 10 pages, I realized that I am reading pornography. And the thing that was consistent with this author and with many authors in that place is this idea of a domineering male figure that you're trying to tame. And that is what creates the love story.
It's the Beauty and the Beast myth.
Yes. And I thought about that when you shared that. Like, we've been taught from a very early age to tame the beast, and that we can tame the beast, and that's the love story.
Yeah. And that's I think what if you want to go see, like, have a lessons in how to find a toxic relationship, just follow the Disney movies advice on how to do romantic. I'm waiting around for my Prince Charming. It's like, well, that's not how you do it, because somebody's going to come along and they're going to pretend to be Prince Charming, and you're going to miss the signs. I was like, well, I'm going to tame the beast, and it's like, well, yeah, but except you can't actually change somebody's heart and soul, and so that's kind of how you get a beast,
right?
And so the problem with most of these kinds of myths is there's a little bit of truth in them. So, for instance, the tame the beast myth is kind of true. Like, I'm a better man because of my wife, right? She has influenced me to be a better man than I would have been. And so to suggest that she can't have an influence on me would be wrong. But the idea that I'm going to change someone's nature, that's a little bit further than an influence. So it's kind of it feels true.
Yeah.
Because you do have influence, but it's not actually true. And the thing that makes someone beastly makes them also resistant to change.
True.
And the abuser wants you to think that you can produce the change you want. And so they create that hope that you can affect the change, that they would be better if only you, right? If you were a better wife, if you were a better cook, if you were a better housekeeper, if you were a better mom, if you were better in bed, I wouldn't have done all of these things.
Right.
And it's silliness, because no one has that kind of control. But what happens is we've been sold a bill of goods.
Right.
That the reason why I am the way I am is because all of those things outside of me. But the truth is the reason I am what I am is because I am me.
Right. And the things that have affected me.
Yeah,
and
my experiences, the way I've handled those experiences, the things that I know, the skills that God's allowed me to have, that, all of those things kind of work together to make me.
Right.
But we also too often identify me as my body.
Yeah.
And I am a person that has a body. I am not a body that has a person. And so sometimes we think my body has a soul. And that's not actually how it works, is my soul has a body. And part of the reason why I think that's important, at least to make the point, is if you chop my arm off, I'm still me. You chop all my limbs off, I'm still me.
Right.
If you take pieces away from me until the most essential component is left that keeps my body running, I'm still me. In fact, if my body dies and is planted in the ground, I'm still me.
Yeah.
So we confuse that. And then what happens is we start being driven by our body impulses, our animalistic urges, as it were, this following after the human animal.
Yeah.
Or what we would call the natural man. And I follow after those things. Well, that's going to produce destructive effects in the world, because we need the spirit, which gives life, to be controlling the flesh.
Yeah, that's so true. And, we've talked about that on here before, about how we are spiritual beings first, and then everything else comes outside of that. But it's like the enemy wants to convince us, and then the world kind of pervades this idea that my body comes first, and what my body desires is what is me. And then spiritually, what is that? We try to ignore that even.
Yeah, and that's when we call the lusts of the flesh. What we're really saying is my body has a desire that it wants to pursue, and it wants to pursue that desire bad enough that I'm willing to sacrifice relationships and time and money and all kinds of things I'm willing to sacrifice in the interest of obtaining that desire.
Right.
That's the lust of the flesh. I have a desire, I have an urge, and I need to fulfill that urge.
Yeah.
But because of the human animal has biology that makes us chase after solving our problems with finding pleasure and avoiding pain, and because we try to find that balance in the way our human organism works, is if that pleasure is too easy, it gets out of balance with the effort required and the discomfort required, and it creates an addictive pattern. Right. Which is what happens, is that God designed the sexual relationship to work where the relationship is work, it's effort, it's struggle. And I work through that effort, and there is a pleasurable relationship with that person that we've now created this bond and this unity and done the hard work of the relationship. And this is it's the cherry on top. But what our culture has done is we've made cherry the whole dessert.
Absolutely.
and even the whole meal. And then we've impoverished relationships dramatically, because now it's, I would be a good human if I had this pleasure, rather than being a good human involves that at some point, maybe.
Yeah.
And we've just elevated it far too high. And so we treat it like it's equivalent to food as a culture.
Yeah, so true. I think it was Kurt Thompson who said that pornography and that kind of arousal and release is a cheap form of intimacy. It's a lazy man's intimacy.
What's a counterfeit?
And I would say lazy woman too. It's not just men, but counterfeit, right?
Yeah, it's a counterfeit for intimacy, but that might be a more feminine approach to seeing that. But I think a masculine approach, which is a little scarier, is it may actually be more of a counterfeit to power and feeling big. And there's a sense of identification that makes me feel powerful, kind of an idea that is embedded in that. So it's not necessarily a striving for intimacy, but it's a strive for pleasure at the expense of whatever is going on and whatever harm is being done.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit uglier than just a substitute for intimacy. Although I do think that men will sometimes in relationship offer physical intimacy as a substitute for real intimacy. And so then all of the things that should be the product of a committed relationship and that God-given unity of marriage that it's designed for, instead what happens is we'll sell the idea of closeness.
Yeah.
And the physical bypasses that need to build emotional depth in the relationship. And the physical just skips right past it. But porn has taught us to do that.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. I mean, that's what has been modeled for generations. Yeah. And so that's what is pervasively in the mind. And so what hasn't been modeled is true intimacy, what it is to emotionally connect and what it is to be vulnerable. And as someone who is a counselor and I work with men and women, I do see how it is so detrimental to men as well. And I don't say this as I'm a woman and I'm mad at men. I say this as a sister in Christ who is seriously concerned, because I do see a decrease in self-esteem, a decrease in sense of significance, because their brains have been altered by the consumption of pornography.
Yeah, I mean, studies have shown it makes you stupid. Cognitively, you decrease your IQ if you're involved in porn. It's just detrimental to everything. It's caustic to your relationship. Your wife is going to feel betrayed. Part of the problem in religious circles is because you've set the expectation, they are betrayed. So if the expectation coming into the relationship is porn is fine, then the betrayal isn't sensed nearly as severely, even though you're still trying to live up to it and you're still trying to measure up, but you can't and you don't know why. It's all that nasty relational stuff that happens just simply because of some desire for pleasure.
Yeah.
But that creates an addiction that is very strong, and it's an addiction that is not easily gotten rid of. Because if I'm addicted to alcohol, I can skip the bar. If I am addicted to drugs, I can stop going by the corner where the drug dealer is. But I can't get away from my mind. And that's always there. And so it is a really pernicious kind of addiction that is really hard to deal with.
It is. And it affects the brain in so many different ways, because whereas it's feeding the addiction part of the brain with the dopamine. But then if you add to that pleasuring yourself, then you're doubling down on what it's sending the brain. And so then you have an even supercharged addiction, and it's multifaceted. It's now behavioral as well as chemical.
Yeah, I was watching a podcast a while back, and it was somebody who is a specialist in terms of the dopamine response. He made a point that has been really interesting to me, that the dopamine response system is not only about pleasure,
right,
but it's also a balancing act against pain.
Yes.
And so what happens is that the body resets itself in its expectations. And so the easier the pleasure is to get, if I understand it right, the easier the pleasure is to get, the body resets my pain index up there and says, this is the balance. So even tiny bits of misery feel like gigantic misery. So I'm now less tolerant, less resilient.
Wow.
And I need that hit again. And that's why it keeps just ratcheting up and escalating.
Yeah. Well, and that tracks, because if you think about that, that's going to bring more irritability, which means that you're going to try to control. And if you believe that your control is about what other people do to make you feel better, of course, that's where you're back into that abusive mindset that can be formed.
Yeah, because I feel out of control now. I want to feel control. This gives me a sense of control.
Right. Right. Yeah. Because it does loop. And I'm glad that you pointed out, because I'm by no means saying that everybody who watches porn is abusive. Right. But I'm glad that you pointed out it is part of the abusive mind is connected to the power and the control of pornography.
Well, and even just the content of pornography is dominated by abuse.
Yeah.
And that if you were to put that inside any relationship, it would be abusive, and obviously so. But I think one of the worst things about this is talking to teenagers whose expectations have been formed in relation to sex, whose education has been informed by porn. And so now girls are expecting to be treated that way.
Yeah.
And they just think that's normal. Mm-hmm. And boys are expecting to be allowed to treat them that way, so that they feel powerful. And that dynamic is so utterly destructive to young people and creates expectations that can never be met. And then when they're not, the disillusionment is powerful. Mm-hmm. So they think there must be something wrong with me. It's like, no, you're just kind of doing it wrong.
Right. Right. Because you've been taught to do it wrong. Yeah.
We're raising an entire generation of people on the philosophy of porn. But I think even if we wanted to just kind of extend that a little bit further, Christians teach a pornified view of sex.
Yes, they do.
And the idea that the whole men are animals, and you've got to dress this way so that the animal man doesn't come after you.
Right.
As at first it denigrates men because it says that spirit-controlled man is still an animal. So instead of how do I find a spirit-controlled man, it's just all men are animals and they behave like animals and they go fulfill their urges, and I'm vulnerable to their urges. And you are vulnerable to a powerful person who wants to use you for their pleasure. That is a vulnerability. That's not an insignificant vulnerability even, but putting all men in that category is a problem.
Yes.
And it also eliminates what about the women, one of the fastest growing demographics of porn users? Now, how do we make peace with that? Because it messes them up the same way, but slightly different because our makeups are different. But what's happened is the way we teach porn is we teach it like it's this absolute need.
Yes.
And if you don't have something, if something's broken, if something's hurtful, then you can't have a good relationship. And in a good relationship, there will be a healthy physical relationship and intimacy. But the nature of that can be dramatically affected by everything from injuries to psychology to my experiences and all of the things that go into that. And if you make the sexual act the point, you have set up the relationship for ruin. So much of that. And
I see that. And I think that, I was thinking about this the other day. I think that we are finally in the generation where we're seeing where fast access to pornography started at a very early age. And now those kids who grew up with that early ongoing access are now of marrying age. And so you can see the destruction of the marital unit because there is so much, especially in Christian circles, right? There was the shame of you shouldn't watch pornography, so I'm doing it in secret. Nobody knows that I'm doing it. But the whole time I'm doing it, I am creating an expectation for what I'm going to get to enjoy when I finally get married. And so then they get married and wife is not willing every night. She is tired. She is exhausted.
Yeah, she's a human being.
He can't live up to the expectations that pornography have placed on him. So he feels small and he feels insignificant. And so you have these natures operating in the two of them that are obviously working against the health of the marriage.
And it's unrealistic. It's not real.
Right.
The whole thing is not real.
Right.
And we're setting expectations of reality based upon a lie.
Yeah.
And it's tragic in the extreme. I think another one of those things that's kind of similar along those veins is that we've adopted this way of thinking that is about my entrance into the relationship is about satisfying my needs and prioritizing my needs and getting my loved one to prioritize my needs. And any relationship with that kind of a pull is going to be a bad relationship.
Yeah.
Even if both people are pulling. And so we create this idea and expectation that for one person to feel powerful, the other must feel vulnerable. And rather than exalting one another and lifting one another up and encouraging one another and being kind to one another, instead what we end up with is I want to use you, and marriage legalizes everything. I've actually heard pastors tell me that. All sexuality, all sexual act is allowable in marriage.
I've heard that too, and it pains me.
It is the most appalling thing to say to a young married couple.
Yeah.
It is utterly appalling because what you just said is the only thing that makes porn wrong is that it's not your wife. And there is so much wrong
absolutely
in the way that people are treated, and the every piece of it from top to bottom is so wrong.
Yeah.
And so we just basically treat marriage like it's sanctified porn. And so now I have to have my porn, but since porn requires novelty and my wife isn't novel anymore, now I have to find novelty, which means I have to find ways for her to satisfy my novelty, or I have to find another one to satisfy my novelty, or I have to go back to porn. And so it's not a solution. And some pastors I've heard say it's in order to avoid porn, get married. It's an abominable suggestion.
Yeah.
It will not work.
Yeah.
Because she can't satisfy that.
No.
And nor should she be expected to.
Right.
It's appalling.
In order to avoid porn, avoid porn.
Had another circumstance where a pastor advised a woman whose husband was traveling so that to keep him from doing porn, to make porn videos for him of yourself, so that because it's his wife.
Yeah.
So let's create a using, self-gratifying relationship because that's better than the alternative.
Yeah. Yeah.
At least it's me. It's appalling.
It is. And I will tell you personally, I once went to a counselor. My husband and I were having difficulties, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying this. And one of the things that she suggested to me, now remember, my podcast people know that I was sexually abused as a child. But one of the things that she recommended to me was to send nude pictures of myself to my husband. Now, he wasn't in the room when she suggested that to me, but that scared the crap out of me. As someone who had been subjected to pornography at a very, very young age and had seen how it had eroded away at my self-esteem. And now she's telling me, hey, do that for your husband. It created more of a chasm of safety between me and my husband.
Yeah, of course it would. Because it's like here, let's just, a couple things. Every teenager should know this truth. Everything you put in a digital format is public and permanent.
Yes.
If you treat all digital content as if it's public and permanent, you save yourself from a world of hurt. And the moment you send that picture, it is no longer private.
Right.
It's public.
Right.
Somebody, somewhere, somebody's computer is storing that image.
Absolutely.
And there's no way around that reality. And so now you are making something public that should be private.
Yeah.
And even if they don't share it, it's still there as a risk. A phone is stolen. Any number of things can happen. Plus, that's just the practical reality of it. Never mind just the obscenity of thinking that that's going to satisfy, that that's going to keep the interest, that that's going to build the relationship, because it can't.
Right.
If you think this makes a good relationship, you don't understand how it works.
No. And I think that's it, is that sex has become the definition for relationship, and good sex has become the definition for healthy relationship.
Yeah.
And it's wrong.
Yeah.
Intimacy, invulnerability, and being known is really the pursuit.
Yeah, I think you go back to the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve were hiding themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that gets treated like they're hiding themselves because they were ashamed of their body. I don't think that's the case.
No. Yeah.
I think they're hiding themselves because they feel vulnerable.
Right.
Because now I know my heart, which means I suspect your heart, which means we're in trouble. And so now I'm hiding myself to protect myself from the other person's sin nature, because now I know my sin nature, because this has gotten ruined and something bad happened.
That's so good. That is so good. Yeah. It was the removal of safety. I've never really thought about that. And so now I have to protect myself because I no longer feel the level of safety.
If we want, we can extend that one step further. Go to Genesis 3 with the curse, when God's speaking to the woman, and he says, your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you, which a lot of people take for how it's supposed to be, but that's actually how it's broke.
That's right.
That's the reality that is going to occur because of how it wasn't designed to be.
Right.
So this is not how it's designed. This is not the ideal we're reaching for. This is what we should expect because it's broken. What is it? You're going to want him and he's going to win. You're going to want him and he's going to win. And staying with him means you're going to put up with stuff you shouldn't put up with because you want him. That's the relational trouble. And then family is going to be troublesome. Yeah. In every way. Raising children is going to be troublesome. All of this is troublesome. Basically, it's about relationships and the breakdown of relationships because of sin. Yeah. And so the one thing that God designed for women to be relational beings and to yearn for that, and what God is telling the woman in that moment is that relational drive is going to be turned into misery and pain. And it's going to be a fight. And any good relationship is going to be a fight. And so here we come now, fast forward to the New Testament and to the idea of the indwelling Spirit of God. And God's Spirit dwells in us to bring us into self-control so that we are spirit-controlled instead of flesh-controlled. And we're not driven by our body. We're driven by the Spirit of God working in our mind to bring us into subjection to Christ. And then in that now I have the ability to reach back before the fall to how God created it to be. So we create a team with humility and with sacrifice and no need to win and no need to dominate and no need to worry and no need to fear. So now we have a wife who doesn't fear and a husband who doesn't dominate. And we have all of the things that are good in a relationship and balanced, and it's how it was designed to be. But God never goes back to the fall to say this is how marriage is supposed to work.
Right. No, that is so good. And it's true. Like, are we living into the, I'm sorry, porn does. It does. Yeah. So, and when we engage porn, it's like we're re-engaging the fall. Yeah. And
we're acting out the fall.
We're acting out the fall. That's so good.
Every
I mean, it's not good that we're reacting.
We are literally acting out the fall. And then we're taking pleasure in the thing that destroyed humanity. The very thing that God said, this is the bad results. And we're just taking pleasure in it. And then the church points back to it and says, that's how it's supposed to be. And so now your husband is supposed to dominate you. You're supposed to give it up whenever he wants it. Yeah. The only place in Scripture that I'm aware of where the Bible talks about power and authority in relation to the marriage relationship, it is exactly equal. Yeah. The husband does not have power over his own body, but the wife. The wife does not have power over her own body, but the husband. It is exactly, precisely equal. Whatever power my wife has, I have. Whatever power I have, she has. And it becomes self-limiting in God's way of looking at it. But it's not designed for a take power. It's designed for an acknowledging power. I treat her as if she owns me. And when you got two people each doing that, you undermine porn. Right. Because now it's not that. It's not this woman using herself to get her satisfaction. It's not this man dominating to get his satisfaction. That's literally the results of the curse. That is so good. And that's something that we're not teaching. No. And we haven't been taught. And I think we need to, which is why it's so important that someone like you has a voice, who is a pastor, who is not, just, hey, here's some good ideas. And I happen to be a Christian, which is great. But also like, no, I'm a pastor. And in my congregation and with those that are assembled around me, these are the things that we stand for as a church. It's important to do so with some compassion, right? There's a vast majority of any given congregation is affected by porn. Yeah. And in some ways addicted to it in a way that is very hard to shake. And the solutions to addiction are actually very similar. all of the addictions
Right.
are very similar solutions. But it still requires some compassion, some self-compassion, and some others' compassion.
Yeah.
But at the same time, not tolerance. Sometimes I think we confuse compassion and tolerance.
100%. Yeah.
You know, in order for me to be compassionate, I have to be tolerant. So the advice I tell young women is that they should tell their husband or their fiance or whatever that I will not remain happily in a relationship where there is porn. I might remain, but I won't do so happily. And I'm probably not going to want to remain.
Right. If you continue this.
If you continue. But I at least need to be honest with myself. I might not want to leave. And so I don't want to make a statement, I will not remain.
Right.
If I don't mean it. And so a boundary has to be, you have to be willing to act on it in order for it to be a good boundary. Otherwise, it's a bad boundary. But the best boundary that I think with respect to this is I will not remain happily married with a person who's using porn.
Does it remain an effective boundary? Do you see?
Well, what it means is that now I'm giving myself permission to leave because I won't remain. I've waited enough. I've waited long enough. I've been patient long enough.
Right.
I told you I wasn't going to do that, and now I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, just prior to this podcast episode, I talk about the messy truth of divorce. And that's one of the things that, and you actually mentioned that in your conference yesterday, was this idea that, you know, we say that adultery is the only excuse for divorce. It's the only justified reason. Yep. But then we don't pay attention to what Jesus said, who changed the narrative of divorce and the definition being the lust of the eyes. And so if we're going to have a conversation about adultery within a marriage, we also have to inquire about the use of pornography and see that as the same.
Yeah. And then if we, two things. One, I think we should not try to make divorce harder, which means, well, then you don't value marriage. Oh, no. I think I value marriage more highly. But I'll tell you why. Because I think what men need in this situation is a healthy appreciation of their wife's mercy and kindness, who would have every biblical justification to kick me to the curb, but loves me in spite of me and shows me a gospel love that I need to respect and honor. See, I think that raises the bar. I don't think it lowers it.
I agree. And maybe people would consider more seriously their obligations and their expectations in their marriage if they knew that they could get divorced.
Well, then, so imagine a little boy who is fearful, who figures that porn gives him pleasure. And so at 10 years old, he comes across some porn. And every time he feels vulnerable and every time he feels afraid, he finds his way to pleasure. And now we've created another fear response, another fear of abandonment, another fear of loss. And we've said, this is the thing that you should fear, and fear should drive you to be righteous and holy and never do porn again. But you can't legislate righteousness. You can't fear people into righteousness. It doesn't work.
That's good. Yeah.
And so what we do then is we create, for an addicted little boy, we create the very thing that is a trigger for his addiction. Doesn't mean that you should stay. That's not the thing. But what it means is I need to be aware of the dynamic of what's happening.
Yeah.
And that there needs to be some compassion in that.
Absolutely.
In how we deal with it. Even if we leave, we can do it with compassion. So even if you're like, nope, this breaks the covenant too much. You have abused me. You have abused porn. You have run our marriage into the ground. You have not been faithful to the covenant that we made. And I am no longer willing to continue.
Yeah.
And that's the reality. And it's an acceptable reality. And I can't be more righteous than God by forbidding it. It's the breaking of the covenant that makes divorce allowable.
Absolutely.
In whatever form that breaking of the covenant happens.
Right. And the reality is that covenant is broken most times long before divorce is ever mentioned.
Well, and if we're really just going to get honest and use God's standard of righteousness, it's pretty much we're all in that boat. We can all just say, yeah, no, I'm not perfect. I've done things I shouldn't done. I've not loved like I shouldn't love. I mean, if we're going to be legalistic about it, then we just can do away with the whole idea of marriage altogether. But there is a point where you can't do it anymore. There is a point where the damage done is too great. There is a point at which there's no way to come back from it.
Right.
And so there's too many lies, there's too many hurts, there's too many betrayals. And that's different for everybody.
Right.
But there does come a point where you're done, and that's got to be okay.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times it's, being honest and talking about it. I encourage couples, a lot of times the things that we're thinking just stay in our head, and we're creating scenarios, and we're creating expectations and harboring feelings because of what's going on in our head, because we can't get it out of our mouth. And so I encourage people, talk about, what is my expectation and where does it come from? And is it a righteous expectation? And what is it requiring of you? Does that feel like an oppression to you? And if it feels like an oppression, we should pay attention to that.
Well, and then if you take the boundaries, like, I'm not trying to control your mind.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to be a porn-soaked, porn-addled mind, feel free.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to be around for that deal, because that's not the kind of person I want to be married to.
Mm-hmm.
So the boundary is me. It's not an attempt to control you.
Right.
And so I think sometimes what happens is, because porn gets in the mix, now it's all of a sudden I clamp down on it in the hopes that I can keep it from happening again.
Mm-hmm.
Or because I need to know that it's happening again.
Right.
And the truth is if you're paying attention and your husband is using porn, you're going to know.
Yeah.
Because when the bedroom turns into a scene,
mm-hmm.
and it becomes a way to act out his lust,
mm-hmm.
and then you feel used
mm-hmm.
and cheap, and you don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
Even if he's not actively looking at porn, porn has entered the bedroom, because all of the philosophy of porn is there.
Yeah.
There's no world in which the sexual relationship should make you feel cheap. It should not leave you feeling used. And if it does, something's broke.
Agreed. And what do you think about, I just was thinking about recently something that had happened in a counseling situation, but do you think that it is unreasonable for women whose husbands have struggled with pornography, or even sexting and things like that, which is just another form of pornography? Do you think it's unreasonable for women to want to check their husband's phone?
I don't think it's unreasonable to want to. I do think that it gives you the illusion of safety.
True.
Because I can just get sneakier
if
I'm your husband. Or I can find another way. Because if I want to do a thing, I'll find a way to do a thing. So you can't really prevent it that way.
Right.
It gives you a false sense of security. And so I would ask someone in that situation, what are you trying to accomplish?
Mm-hmm.
Are you trying to prevent him from being bad? Because if you are, you can't do that.
Mm.
And if you can't live with him in light of that reality,
mm-hmm.
then you might be done.
Yeah. And that's the hard conversation. Yeah. It's never easy.
No. But I think freedom is the best way to go, which is basically you can be whatever you want to be. But if you're going to be that, I'm not sticking around.
Yeah.
Right. And then in an environment of freedom, sin lets loose.
Yeah.
And when sin lets loose, now you know.
Yeah.
But I usually don't want to know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to try to clamp it down to keep it hidden so that I can't see. That almost becomes a way to protect myself from what I know to be true.
Yeah.
And that's never a good way to live.
No, it's not. It's dysregulated.
Yeah, just freedom. Just live in freedom. Yeah. I'm going to be me, you be you. And I'm not going to live with someone who's not going to be faithful. Like, if you're not going to be faithful to the covenant, then we can be done.
Mm-hmm. And and it's fair and it's just.
Yeah.
Right. And isn't that what God does with us? Like, I'm not going to force you to be righteous. This is what righteousness looks like, and you get a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the situations that I've seen with that, it's scary to do because you don't want the loss of the relationship.
Yeah.
And you also don't want the porn to be there, but you don't trust that the other one wants the same things.
Mm-hmm.
So you're stuck between, do I put up with this person who is altogether breaking the covenant? Do I put up with it for other reasons, whatever they might be, children, money, finances, experiences, family? And there's a million reasons why people put up with stuff.
Right.
Do I put up with it or don't I? If you give yourself permission to not put up with it, and then you check your reasons why you're not going to put up with it, you have a better foundation to make a decision to leave or not.
Yeah. And what I do love is that you not only meet with those people who are being abused in your ministry, but you also have a ministry towards the abusers.
Yes.
And you have to, there's a mutual understanding that they're both individuals and they're both hurting.
Yep.
And one is asking for help, and maybe the other one will find help in that pursuit.
Yeah. And step one on that is I've got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't get somebody to I've got a problem and it's not anybody else, right? That's like step one. You get that, you can help somebody.
Yeah.
But if you don't get that, you can't help them. There's no way to help an abuser without killing entitlement. It's not possible.
And what you say is the reverse of power, or the better thing is humility, right? That there's not a power balance, but it's that we're both walking in humility.
Yeah, because the truth is 9 times out of 10, the husband is stronger, bigger, and able to force the wife.
Yeah.
And the wife is vulnerable to that strength. 9 times out of 10, that's the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so to say I'm equal, it's not exactly true, because in a physical fight, I win. In a war of kindness, I'm probably not going to win. And maybe my wife is smarter than me. Maybe she's got more resources than me. Maybe she's more organized than me. She's got power in other ways. But the most dangerous power is the physical power.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that kind of way of trying to equalize power and forcing is disastrous. But it's just as disastrous in any other form to the relationship. It's just not as dangerous.
Right.
And so now we've got this dynamic, but if we're honest about that, I do have more power. And so what's that power for?
Mm.
If the power is for me to make me feel strong, well, then I'm going to be abusive. If the power is to serve and to sacrifice and to put your needs ahead of my own and use that power to serve you, well, then that's good. Because if me and my wife are walking down the street and I'm the big one and some bad person comes in to rob us, the big one should be going and taking care of business and getting in the way to protect my wife. She wants me to be big and strong in that moment, right? That's good and right. And it's supposed to be how it is, because now I'm serving her. But she doesn't want me turning that on her. Now I'm treating her like that threat. And so my power is always given to serve. And so whatever power it is, if I'm smarter, that's to serve. If I'm richer, it's to serve. If I'm whatever it is, that whatever extra power I've got over another person, I don't need to lie about it and pretend I don't. I just need to use it for service.
Right. And I love another thing that you say is the most important thing that I have to protect my wife from is from myself.
Yeah. Well, everywhere in scripture, that's what it says.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, protect your wife. Does the Bible say men should protect their wives? Yes. But everywhere it's from me, to treat her as a precious vessel, as a weaker vessel, not weaker in the sense of inferior, but weaker in the sense of breakable. Treat her like she's breakable.
Yeah.
Treat her with care,
mm-hmm.
kindness, and grace. And that's moderating me. So I'm protecting her from me. So one of the things I like to tell young men, young married in particular, is that the day your wife married you, she created a permanent relationship with the person most likely to kill her, statistically speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And that means there's a vulnerability in that. And we know that. Mm-hmm. It's instinctive. We know that that's true. That's why we focus on the men, is because the men are less vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Can women be abusive and abuse power? Sure. But who's in society most vulnerable? Women are.
Yeah. I think it's so good. And I really hope that more people get this message and hear this message. And I know that Banner's doing a lot to help you get this message out. And I want to help that. Is there any way that people can, I know Psalm 82 Initiative is your own ministry.
Yeah.
And so is there any way, if say somebody's listening and they're like, man, you just read my script. Like, I'm struggling with that. And I'm also being abusive. Can they reach out to you?
Yes. To get on my schedule in terms of time, that's done through Banner. So
okay.
Call the Banner Institute in Monroe, Louisiana.
Okay.
That's one avenue. The other thing is there's resources that are available. There's articles on our website, and I make it available. If people email me, I answer the emails as I can. Contact us through Psalm 82 Initiative, the Facebook page, whatever it is. I'll help if I can.
Okay.
It's just that there is a large demand on my time.
I'm sure.
So the scheduling through Banner is the only way for me to guarantee the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm really excited that you're here, and I hope to be able to have more conversations with you because you're just doing great things.
Thank you.
But just to kind of end the interview on a lighter note, what is something that brings you joy?
Grandkids.
Oh, grandkids. How many grandkids do you have?
I have one and one on the way.
Oh, sweet.
That's a special thing. And part of it is that my dad, in the back of his Bible, he had a saying, and his dad had it in the back of his Bible.
Oh, wow.
And it was, children are the only thing in this world you can take to heaven with you.
I love that.
And so it's the people in my life that I want to invest in that are most precious to me. That's where the joy is. That's
true. That's true. And we want to stay joyful, especially with all the things that are going on in the world.
You know, there's always hope. This is not an inevitability.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be broken.
Yes.
Jesus came to fix it. We just have to give our mind over to the Spirit of God and not cave to the flesh. Don't let the flesh drive. Let the Spirit drive.
I think that's a great note to end on. Don't let the flesh drive. Let the Spirit drive. Amen. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome. Thank you.